Hi, this is Josh Weidman and welcome to today's training. Today we're going to talk about screening applicants to find and keep rockstar residents. This is for your rental properties. This is a process that has kind of been refined over the years with my own rental properties and also with my property management company, where we lease and place about between 200 and 300 residents on an annual basis. So with that in mind, let's talk about the steps. When I first got started, and I see this a lot from people that come to me to manage their properties, I was interested in filling vacancies as quickly as possible. Obviously, that's the objective. You make more money, the lower the vacancy rate. However, the issues that I did see and the problems that I did run into were based on, seeing the wrong residents placed into properties. The first person to show up with the money was given a lease on the house. And oftentimes that's a big mistake. So where do you start? How do you know who's going to be a good resident, who's not? Believe it or not, there's a couple small building blocks, pretty easy information if you follow your own system. So the whole thing is going to start before we even have a vacancy or before we even start advertising, taking calls, or showing the apartment. And that's going to be by setting your standards. Setting standards is important in any industry. I mean, really before, we talk a lot of times about analyzing properties, and before we can analyze properties, we have to determine what we want to do, how we're going to analyze them, what is the measuring stick between, to determine what is a great property and what's a dud, So finding and analyzing tenants is exactly the same thing. What we want to start with are three of my, I have got basically three criteria in which to analyze prospective tenants, and it's kind of like having three legs of a stool. If you have a three-legged stool and all three of the legs are solid, it's going to be a really good relationship. If you have two legs of that stool and you take one away, you need something to replace that missing leg to kind of buttress the stool. And if you only have one, the thing's not standing no matter what. Okay, so let's take a look at this. The first criteria is going to be income. Now, depending on your area, depending on the price point of your rental, this is going to vary, but I like to use 3 times the monthly rent as a jumping off point. This is a little bit skewed on both ends of the financial spectrum. If you are renting rooms, typically people that are going to be renting a room or an efficiency apartment for $400 a month, their income's probably not that great, their credit's probably not that great. There's some things that might be a little askew. And on the other end of the spectrum, in the really high-end apartments, $4,000 or $5,000 a month, what you find is that the person who makes 10 grand or 12 grand a month, even though it might not be 3 times the monthly rent, there's enough money there that they're going to be able to cover the rest of the bills. But the whole idea here with 3 times the monthly rent is typically, if somebody makes 3 times the monthly rent, they're going to cover the rent, their expenses on the property, as well as their personal expenses for food and transportation, all that kind of stuff. And they'll have a little bit of money left over for discretionary income. That discretionary income is kind of important because, let's say something goes wrong. Things always go wrong in life. The car breaks down, somebody passes away and they need to pay for a funeral, or, there's just other unexpected, back to school clothes for the kids, whatever it is. 3 times the monthly rent usually gives enough wiggle room. Next, I'm going to look at credit. And this is going to be 100% based on the area in which you're targeting. Most of the rentals that I own, and a good percentage of those that I manage, are not in the greatest areas. They're not in bad areas, but they're in B and C grade neighborhoods out of an A to C scale. In those type of properties, I'm willing to concede a little bit on the credit score. If the average credit score in the area is 580 and my applicant has a 620 score, well, they're a much better candidate. At the same time, if I have a 500 credit score, regardless of what end of the spectrum, and what grade of property I'm looking at, probably not going to be a very good applicant. Then you have areas that are really in A-grade areas where every applicant has a 700, 800 credit score. They've got very strong income. In that kind of situation, I don't care how strong their income is. If their credit's not good, I'm just going to pass. So, that's something to consider, the credit. Next is going to be their rental history. Rental history is pretty important. It's a lot of times the thing for me that can make or break. You have a lot of people out there that have bad credit, but the one thing that they always pay is the rent. Those are good tenants. Those are good residents. You take care of them, they're going to take care of you. They're going to make sure that they pay their rent on time every month. But with this, when you're screening residents, one thing that you want to keep in mind is that they want your apartment. They have a vested interest in providing you with and telling you what you want to hear. So I always ask for the last two landlords, because guess what? They can give you the current landlord, and let's say you call them up, and let's say they are a problem resident. You call up that landlord, you talk to him, and he's hearing, oh man, this is great. This is somebody who's going to take this problem off my hands. So he'll give you, a good bill of health, get him out the door, and now they're your problem. They're not his problem. That's why I like the prior landlord. The landlord that, they're not living in the property anymore. They've already moved out. He's got no vested interest to tell you that they were a great resident, or that, basically they move them out of his property. He'll be very candid oftentimes, or she'll be very candid. Tell you, they were late, they beat up the property, they were a hassle, they always had complaints and they were calling for service, or hey, they paid on time every time. And that is the unsympathetic gear. One thing that you want to be careful of when you're calling these rental references is that I've seen in the past, I've had residents that give me fake names and phone numbers. Ask off-the-wall questions that only a landlord would know. Things like, what was the, they might have been a great resident, but what was the worst thing you can remember? Did they ever have any friends that showed up unexpected? Was there anything broken? Did you ever get any ridiculous service requests? Things like that, to open the door and have them start talking. You'll find out pretty quick that a lot of times, you'll get a fake reference. The last standard that I look for is what I call deal killers. Deal killers are those things that will absolutely strike the absolutely strike the application. If all three of these criteria are met and in good standing, and then you have one of these deal killers, it's going to kill it. The application will be an automatic denial. Deal killers are things like evictions. If they've ever had a landlord-tenant complaint filed, they might not have been locked out of the property, but guess what? They were somebody's headache. That's one. Another deal killer for me is going to be any kind of violent crimes. I can deal with somebody that had some criminal history 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and there's not been a blip on the radar since. We all make mistakes. But if you see that they have gun-related or drug-related crimes, for me, that's an automatic denial. Another deal killer is any kind of crimes related to, related to children or animals. They're deal killers for me. Okay. So anyway, these are the three basic legs of my screening, and then I've got the overall just cover your butt type stuff. So now, once you've set your standards, now it's time to bring in the applications. One thing that I have noticed a lot, Craigslist is a free place to advertise your property. It's amazing how many over-exaggerated posts there are. All of a sudden, every house is a chateau. There's an extra bedroom. Everything is gorgeous and perfect. Be realistic and be honest about your listing. Make sure that your apartments are clean. Make sure that they're well maintained. And when you put it on up for rent, make sure that you represent the property certainly in its best light, but also accurately. Number of bedrooms and bathrooms, amenities, the costs involved with leasing the unit, not just the rent. If there's any additional utility charges or any additional charges that you're going to assess against the resident when they're living in the property, it's something that you need to bring up. Then, when you get calls, after you start advertising, make sure you set expectations for the residents and the applicants that are calling you. If you know that you're going to need 3 times the rent, that credit has to be good, and that you're going to need rental history. If you've got a if you've got somebody young that's calling you that this is going to be their first apartment, and they've got bad credit, and they just started their job 2 weeks ago, and it's only 2 times the monthly rent, that's probably going to be an automatic denial. So don't waste your time scheduling an appointment and go and show the apartment to somebody that you know is not going to be qualified. pre-screen these interested parties before you go and show them the property. Then once you meet them at the property, the next part of the screening process is going to be to trust your gut on the showings. If you have a scheduled appointment for 2 o'clock in the afternoon because that's when the resident wanted to meet you there, and they show up at 2:30 or 3 o'clock, that's not a great sign, especially without a phone call. If you meet them at the property and they're on time, but they smell like they just took a bath in Jack Daniels, or they're abusive to their verbally abusive to their significant other or the kids, or they're dressed in a manner that makes you feel like there might be that they would be giving you a bad attitude or giving you a situation that is not going to be a pleasant relationship, an ongoing pleasant relationship. That's what you got to just think about. You're getting married to this tenant, so to speak. You are set up in a relationship for the next several weeks and months, possibly years. So you want to set the groundwork initially, make sure that you're comfortable with them in the first impression, they're comfortable with you, and lay out what you expect from them, and they should they should be able to say to you, look, this is what I expect from you, a decent living environment, to be left alone, and peace and quiet so they can just enjoy the property. So now we've gone through, we've set up the advertising, we have our criteria, we set up the advertising, we screen the people on the phone, that everything checks out. They came in, they seem like pretty nice people. Now it's time to take an application. They're interested in the apartment, they want to move in next week. Let's get the screening done. These are the 5 must-haves for every application. Number 1, contact information. This seems pretty self-explanatory. You need their name, their phone number or phone numbers. You need their current address, their email address. You also are going to need their social security number and the date of birth. The date of birth and social security number are going to be essential to running a background screening for credit and criminal history. So you need that information. Next, you want the address, the name and phone number of their last 2 landlords, as well as how much they paid in rent each month, and the reason for leaving each address. Those 2 things are really important. This reminds me, one of the best questions that you can ask a landlord is whether the current resident gave notice. Did they give notice when they were leaving the property? Yes or no? If they didn't give notice, that's a bad sign. That means they're only interested in their own, in their own goodwill, especially if they want to move in next week and they are required to give a 30-day notice to move into another property. That's a bad sign. All right, income documentation. I could tell you that I make $20 million every month, but if I can't show you where the money's coming from and show you it deposited into my account, why would you ever believe me? It's the same with these residents. You want to make sure that you are not just asking how much money they make, but give me documentation. Documentation could include just simple pay stubs. If they work for themselves, well then just show me deposits into your bank account. People make cash under the table. That's great for them, but that is not something you can consider as part of the income because you can't document it. Anything, bank account statements, tax returns, W-2s, paycheck stubs, any of those things. Basically, you want to support the information that they're putting in their application. You want to be able to support that with documentation. Okay. 4th thing, you need to ask a couple key questions. Have you ever been evicted from a property? Yes or no? If they say yes, it's an automatic turn down. Do you have any judgments related to your rental history? Are there any, any collections because you didn't pay rent? Another question. Another question you want to ask is, have you ever intentionally withheld rent from your landlord? If so, why? I mean, we want this detail. We're not just trying to sidestep people that have been evicted. We're also trying to sidestep problems. Because the fact is, if you have a resident who got pulled into landlord-tenant court, the likelihood is they were a headache for somebody else. Don't let them be a headache too. And then Number 5, for the must-haves for every rental application, is going to be a release of information. It just basically says that you have the right to contact their current landlord, their current employer, and to do a screening and background check, including criminal history and creditworthiness, to determine their rentability. Very simple. They're going to need to read it, sign it, initial it, and there you have your application. Once we're in this process, I've kind of broken this down to a simple screening process, a 3-step screening. And that is, first we want to look at income. If they don't have the income that we've determined is the minimum income standard, then they're denied. Once we've determined the income looks good, we've got the documentation, the numbers look good, now we're going to run a screening. We're going to take a look at their credit. Do they qualify with the score, with the content of their credit report? Are you comfortable with what you're reading in the contents and in the score? If the answer is yes, great, keep going. If not, they're denied. Well, now we know they've got quality income, they qualify with their credit. Do they have good landlord references? Yes or no? If so, great, you got an approved tenant. It's awesome, you ready? Get them moved in. Obviously, we're going to make sure that there's no deal killers. And before we end this training, I said that there was kind of 3 legs of a stool here. There are times when you have 2 out of 3. In fact, most of the time in the properties that I manage and that I own, residents will have 2 out of 3 qualifications. Maybe they'll have the income and not the credit, but they'll have a good landlord reference. Or they're new to renting, but they've got good income and their credit is pretty decent. That 2 out of 3 situation is when you throw in, some added criteria. And that might be a cosigner. Maybe their income's just not there. If that's the case, require a cosigner. Somebody that has good credit, good income, good landlord reference, that owns their own property, that's going to cosign on the loan to make sure that, if they don't pay, the primary resident doesn't pay, the cosigner is on the hook as the tenant and the leasee on the lease. Or let's say their credit is awful, they pay the other 2, maybe you have another cosigner, or maybe you add on an additional rental fee or an additional deposit in case they're going to be evicted. You want to make sure that there's 2 months rent there and in security deposit or something like that. So that's the idea. The whole intent here is to identify the best candidates and to really get rid of the ones that are going to be problematic. So that's it for today's training. I wish you the best in your tenant screening, finding the best tenants for your properties. It's a really important part of the rental property business. Till I see you next time, best of luck in your real estate investing, and have a good one.